Okay, thanks, Phil. Right, apologies, I'm getting an echo from somewhere. Is that you, Phil? Okay, no, still getting an echo. Let's try again. I'm still getting an echo from somewhere.
I think it's you, twice, weirdly.
Yeah, there's two Richard Georges on, and both of them are unmuted.
Ah, right, solved the problem. User error. Right, apologies in advance. I've got a bit of a cold at the moment, so forgive any coughing and spluttering during this, but hopefully my voice will hold out. Right, so let's kick off with an obvious question. What is information architecture? So this is a definition I found on a government website, which I think is a bit ironic in itself, but it's actually quite a practical definition. Information architecture is the practice of deciding how to arrange the parts of something to be understandable without big effort. And I think the key part of that definition is right at the end there. It comes from the usability adage, don't make me think. So in other words, you shouldn't make people work any harder than they really need to get what they're after. And the definition goes on. It's about organizing, structuring, and labeling content in an effective and sustainable way. Again, key bit is at the end. Sustainability requires that your information architecture works not only now, but in the foreseeable future. That is, it allows for growth and a level of change. Of course, it's not always that far ahead, the foreseeable future, so you should always be prepared to mix things up a bit, change it around as the need requires. And finally, I think the absolute crux of this definition is that it provides a goal. The goal is to help users find information and complete tasks. So the whole point of IA really is to make people's lives easier, more efficient, and more productive. And if you can do that, you'll probably make them happier as well. So, finding information, which is what information architecture is intrinsically related to, helping people find information. Large, disparate bodies of data tend to be searched by keywords. So Wikipedia is a good example of that. It's got a taxonomy in place, but I'm sure people don't usually use that. They'll probably just do a search from Google to find what they're looking for. And don't worry about any navigational structure within that. So I don't know whether you noticed that, but having seen it, you can probably see it a lot clearer now. Obviously, smaller sets of information that tend to have more coherence are much more likely to be browsed following a path through a curated hierarchy. I think one of the big problems with Confluence as a set of data is it very often falls on the cusp between a large disparate set of data and a more coherent set of data. So people actually tend to use mixed strategies to find what they're looking for in Confluence. Keyword searches, space categories, bookmarks, which are now called save for later for some reason, navigation, links, labels, and summary pages. These are all techniques that we use all the time trying to get data out of Confluence. So a user might search for stuff that they're not familiar with, but they might actually, in an area they are familiar with, they might just browse through a structure to try and find the content they're after. So typically Confluence will actually need to cater quite effectively for a number of different strategies for finding information. So what are the particular challenges in relation to Confluence? Well, I think unlike websites, which are often designed up front by user experience experts, Confluence has no out-of-the-box navigational structure. And the building blocks are fairly basic as well. You've got categories, spaces, and pages out of the box. And you can mix and match these as you like. Also, I think one of the big challenges of Confluence is that it's confident that content is added over time, often by a large user base with different levels of skills and abilities and different focuses. Typically, companies don't tend to invest in content managers Confluence, although I think they probably should a lot of the time. So there's a lot of challenges that actually result from this. A well-designed website will tend to have a very well worked out hierarchy based on good usability practice, like defining user groups, personas, and user stories and journeys through the site. That's often quite an involved process, whereas Confluence, on the other hand, tends to grow organically. Content gets added as it's needed by different authors, with little consideration for the overall structure or even the maintainability of that content over time. Confluence content creators live very much in the here and now, and this leads to a number of other problems as well. One of the big challenges in Confluence is what I call the breadth versus depth problem, which manifests itself in terms of how much content you put at one level before it gets too large to manage, and when do you break it down into smaller subsections to make it more digestible. Breadth versus depth is important because content at the top of a hierarchy is usually intended to answer the most immediate, the most pressing questions that somebody might have. Tends to be high level and tends to be quite punchy in terms of its impact. Then if you drill down into the lower levels of a hierarchy, it tends to add more detail and tends to be more for the people who want to drill into that additional information. Too much content at the top level risks losing focus, making it difficult to start a journey through the content, let alone finish it. Again, this is usually designed into websites as part of the design process. In Confluence, however, it kind of hits the users in a fairly major way, in that what you tend to end up with is a structure that tends to be quite flat in its nature. You've got a very very large number of pages all at the same level within a structure, which actually makes it very difficult to get anywhere with that information. It just presents a long list of pages all on the same level. And that's often very frustrating for users, as they get no indication as to what's important, what's not, where they go, and how they get through that information. With everything at the same level, you generally can't see the wood for the trees, and that easily gets very frustrating and confusing for users. Of course, the most important consideration for breadth versus depth is finding a structure that works well both for the content and the users. The key is to generate content in such a way as to suit both the content and the audience. And in Confluence terms, that means satisfying two different user groups, really. The content creators as one key user group. They need to be able to produce content quickly and efficiently, but still have it make sense to the second user group, which is the content consumers. And they need to be able to find the information they're looking for quickly without wasting time and effort. But a big problem with Confluence is it's very difficult to actually provide any structure up front. So trying to create your information architecture, set up spaces from the get-go very often leads to a complete lack of information, a structure without any content. I think that's one of the most frustrating things when you're looking through any kind of website, particularly Confluence, is hitting empty pages. You've taken time to get there, nothing to see. But I think perhaps the biggest problem of all with Confluence is actually the people who run it, and specifically in this case, the content creators. Left to their own devices, people do all kinds of crazy things. And the big challenge is to make Confluence easy to use for the content creators as well, making it easy for them to do the right thing, put the information in the right place to make it easy for the content consumers then to come along and find it. So Confluence is of the people, by the people, for the people, and so always tends to be a bit confused and muddled. Okay, so a Confluence site is never ever going to be as structured and organized as a designed website, but there are a few things we can do to try and make it a bit more manageable, both for the consumers and the producers of the content. So what I want to do now is look at a few examples of how we can manage content in a way that helps both the consumers and the creators. So the first thing I want to look at, and one of the key tools we have, is content templates. Templates can provide a structure to the information on a page, so long as they're well designed, fit for purpose, and crucially understood and used consistently by the user base. So good design is really about consistency, having a clear logic to the layout that reflects both the importance and the purpose of the content, and reusing the same design principles across multiple templates. Being fit for purpose is actually quite tricky because that can change over time. So another key factor of good use of templates is to make sure the template's owned, reviewed regularly, and updated or retired or replaced when they need to be. That can actually throw up a lot of problems in itself in terms of maintaining content over time and producing inconsistencies within Confluence over time, but I'm not going to dwell on that for now. Actually, the point I was making there about consistency is the most important one, and a key factor in driving that consistency is making sure that your content creators are properly trained and have the skills and the information they need to actually generate that content consistently. And part of that process really is to make sure that your content creators actually understand the rationale behind the templates. If they know why something is designed in a certain way and what it's intended to achieve, they're much more likely to respect it, and they're much more likely to give you better feedback if they think the template isn't fit for purpose, if it's not doing its job properly. So templates are generally good for semi-structured data, where you have a kind of repeatable structure, but the content within that can vary quite a bit. They're less good maybe for more structured data, but they can still be used for that. So let's take a quick look at an example here. This is fairly typical template, one of mine. My templates tend to be all of the same design. It's not because I'm lazy and unimaginative, it's because it does actually make them easier to use, hopefully. And this structure here, if we take a look at it, conforms to a very standard web pattern. You've got a three-column structure with your main content in the middle, and then you've got your navigation on the left, and you've got some secondary content on the right-hand side there. That's been a mainstay of web design for donkey's years now. It's only really started breaking down in the last few years with the advent of mobile-first frameworks, Bootstrap, Foundation, that kind of thing, which have gone for a slightly different design paradigm. But users are generally going to be quite familiar with this kind of structure and layout. So I want to actually take a look at some examples now. So let's move away from the presentation and take a look at some content. So this is the one we were just looking at. If we actually look at the template structure behind this, what I fairly consistently do is use the page layout structure here to give my page a definition. So you've got the two areas here. Left is the main content, right is the sub-content. People do actually tend to slightly overuse the page layout structure in pages. To my mind, it's there simply to give you your broad page definition, not to demarcate content within that, which you can do in the usual way with headings and subheadings within your page itself. So use carefully. You've got a nice clean structure there that you can use for dividing your content up, or dividing your page up into useful chunks. If you notice on the right-hand side here, where we've got quite a bit of white space underneath our right-hand panel. That normally doesn't worry me too much. People are normally using large screens when they're looking at this content. And actually what you don't want is to actually make people read across the full width of the screen when they're looking at content. People actually read more efficiently and scan much more efficiently if their main content is within a slightly narrower width. So you don't need to feel that on any page that you need to fill the entire width with content. It actually makes it more difficult for users. So another trick, another macro we can use to actually structure content within a template is the Adaptivist content formatting macros. One of my favorites in this respect is one I've used here, which is the tab content. And we've got quite a bit of content on this page, but because it's broken down across the top here into tabs, we can actually navigate through this in a very structured, very straightforward way to get through the information we're looking at. From a content creator's point of view, though, this does create a bit more of a headache. You inevitably get much more complicated templates using this kind of navigation. So you can see we've got the various aspects of the macro here to organize the content. Actually makes it a bit more of a challenge from a content creator's point of view to update and maintain this content. So one of the key factors then in generating templates like this is to balance the needs of the content creators against the content consumers. A good rule of thumb here is to consider what the primary use of the content, how many authors you've got, and how skilled those authors are. If you have a small number of skilled authors, then your templates can get quite confusing, quite fussy, quite complicated for the benefit of the end users, the consumers, who then have a much easier job of navigating that content. On the other hand, of course, if you've got something where you've got lots of different authors with different skills, you probably want to keep your templates a lot simpler. You might have to sacrifice some of the benefits of the end users, the consumers, in order to make sure that content is easily creatable and easily editable. Another technique you've probably seen on occasions, one which I'm not so much of a fan of, is to actually use the page includes, which actually, using the same tabbed structure here, you can see using the page includes makes it a bit easier then for a content creator to manage that content. It's a little simpler on the eye when you're in the editing mode. But from a user's perspective, you've still got the tab content at the top, but your left-hand navigation, when you're using it, becomes much more complicated. You've got content which appears in here also appearing in your navigation down the side. And if we start adding additional pages to this space, it soon gets quite unmanageable from a browsing point of view. Less of a risk if you're consistently searching for material rather than navigating through hierarchy, but worth bearing in mind that if you use that kind of approach, you are creating clutter in your navigation. So that's looking at templates as ways of structuring data. And so key takeaways from here is that you really need to balance the needs of the content creator with the content consumer. Always a bit of a juggling act, but what you want to do is to try and construct something which balances those needs. Next technique I want to look at, which is one you're probably all familiar with, is template pairs. These are very common in Confluence. I know Atlassian produce a lot of these. Basically, you have a summary page, and then you have a lot of content below that based on a template. That uses page properties and the page properties reports macros. And it's actually a great way of tackling this flat hierarchy problem, which I can demonstrate as well. So I couldn't find an example on I for this, so I've gone to one of my personal pages, which covers a subject dear to my heart, which is wine. If you take a look down the side here, you can see under my wine navigation, there's a lot of flat content all under that one page there. But because this is a template pair, I can create sub-pages using the Add Wine button there. Actually, just a point of reference, that is the Adaptivist create page macro. It's much better than the inbuilt create from template macro. It's got much more flexibility. It allows you to define where the pages are created. So they don't necessarily have to be created under this page here. I could put this button anywhere on a site or on a page and still have that content created in my structure here. Also, because this is a summary report, I've got the ability to organize that data and to prioritize whatever I'm interested in. Another really brilliant macro for managing this flat data is the table filter and charts for Confluence macro, which is the one at the top here, which allows you to slice and dice content much more easily within Confluence. So let's say I'm cooking a paella this evening, and I want to select a wine to go with that. I can, first of all, let's go for Spain, seeing as that's where paella comes from. I might want to go for a white, seeing as it's mostly seafood. And I'm shopping locally, so let's I want to look in Marks and Spencer's and maybe Tesco's. So immediately, with a bit of filtering, my long list here of virtually unnavigable stuff comes down to just a small number of choices. And I can see it here, the one at the top, very highly rated and very cheap. So that's my selection for this evening. Right. Another technique I want to look at, which is perhaps less familiar, but is perhaps just an extension of the template pairs, is what I call cascading templates. This gives you the ability to actually define, through your use of templates, a hierarchy. So we're going back to our breadth versus depth problem, and we're using templates to manage and create that hierarchy using the template structure. Oh, actually, forgotten something. I'll go back to this. Another advantage of the page property reports is that you can actually define reports using labels that pull content in from a number of different sources. This is something I use all the time to manage the projects I'm involved in. This is my homepage within I, and I've used a page properties report to pull in the key information from all the projects I'm looking at any one time. That means I don't have to go through hunting through I to find the information I need. It's all here at a glance, and it's all done through the page properties report and labels. Right, so moving on then to the cascading templates. This is our fictional company here, the Acme Trading Company. And at the top level, I've got a template here which gives me my home page for the company space. Again, using my tab navigation to chunk the information into something manageable for the users. But obviously, if I'm dealing with a company, the main job in hand here is to manage projects for that company under professional services. So I've got the ability here to create projects simply by clicking a template. So let's go for and create that new project from the template. Let I whir away in its own sweet fashion. Right, I won't fill this in, but let's assume I've done that and save the page. So because this is created from a create page macro, I've got my new project now in the hierarchy in a sensible place. I've also got my summary content under projects on the home page. When that actually decides to populate, there we go. Right at the top there as the most recent project. So that's the first level of this cascade. We've got the space homepage giving me the section at the top here. So I've got a new project and I want to create some sections under that. So the second level of the cascade is I've got the options here under documents to create a number of new sections for this project. So let's say I want to create some Adaptivist documents. This is project 03. And again, because I'm using the create page macro, the macros are doing all the work for me of defining my structure, my navigational structure, my hierarchy in a nice, orderly and structured way on the side here without me having to worry about it. And again, the final step of this cascade, obviously I want to create a document. And let's just save that. So as you can see, just by using the macros and clicking to create the new content, I've got a nice, well-organized, navigational, nice browsable structure on the left-hand side without ever hitting the create button, messing around with the potentially millions of, need to show some more there, millions of possible template choices, having to worry about where in my hierarchy I'm going to stick it, not ending up with a huge long list of pages all at the top level of my structure. Obviously, there's some major advantages to that. Makes your content easy for the creators to do the right thing, not mess things up inadvertently. Means that they have to be less skilled as content creators. A lot of the thinking, a lot of the hard work is taken away from them through the use of the macros. So they just press the buttons to create that structured content. And it keeps it nice and simple for the users who get a nice, well laid out content structure, both within the pages and within the space hierarchy as well. And basically, you're giving people what they want in the way that doesn't challenge them to find it. So finally then, another big problem that we can tackle in this way and pull all these ideas together is to create space templates or blueprints to manage that process more effectively. One of the big problems with Confluence that people sweat about really is that question of what constitutes a space. What level of content should be a new space? For example, we went through there the creation of a space for a customer. You might debate whether a space should be at the customer level or the project level, or maybe at the department level. If you create blueprints to cover all these things off, again, your users don't need to worry about that. They hit the buttons and they'll get the content structured as they need it. A lot of the decisions about sizing and what constitutes a space or not is then managed through your blueprint. And so you're making it easy for people to do the right thing at the right time. So let's go for a quick demo of that. This is a blueprint I've wrapped up for. I haven't actually got this on I yet, so I'll demonstrate it from my space again. So if we go through and create space, this is the professional services customer space. Click on that. We'll call this test 3. Again, I won't go through this in detail because it's exactly the same as what I've just been through here. But you can see I've got my cascading template set up here. I can create a new project. Let that whir away. And under that project, I can, let's say, create a new set of adapters documents. And then create a new document there. And very easily and very simply, based on selecting the blueprint, I've immediately created a number of pages within a defined hierarchy just by hitting buttons. So that's covered of templates. Obviously, there's a lot of things within Confluence that I haven't covered, and I'm not going to today. Things like, for example, managing space categories. Oh, I didn't actually demonstrate that, but because of the templates in the blueprint, it automatically gets added to a predefined space category, which helps with keeping stuff organized. Labels is another interesting area of managing content. We've kind of touched on it in terms of the report pages, the page properties reports, but that's a big area in its own right. And another couple of areas that are worth thinking about is content maintenance and keeping content current. Those can wait for another session. I'm not going to cover those today. Right, any questions?
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. I see that Daniel's made a footnote to everybody about when you do and don't have white wine with paella. Maybe we should take this forward and have a practical exercise as well as a theoretical exercise, specialising on the different drinks. So just a quick reminder for those who joined late, remember that show and tells are recorded and they're available on I. And if you've got any great ideas for something that you would like to present on a show and tell, you're always welcome to put your name in and get it accepted. And we look forward to seeing you all next Friday. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.